This conference will now be recorded.
So yesterday we were discussing about Docker file instructions. We were discussing about all these things which is already done. We discussed about these instructions. So we have a few more instructions like label, expose, user, and also value. Like this, we have some instructions. These are pretty simple and straightforward instruction. So what is this label? In general, what is labels, guys? In general, what is labels? Labels are basically key value pairs. Key value pairs again, which can be attached to the image. Basically, kind of a tags, metadata. Labels are metadata. So it's a key value pairs which can be attached to the image. Kind of a identification purpose. Kind of a unique metadata. Let's say I have image. I can attach labels like this image is created on so and so from so and so branch. This image is maintained by so and so team. Labels, key value pairs. If you see, let me connect to some Docker server where I have images. Let me connect to this server. If you see, I have some images. I want to know in future some information about this image, kind of a metadata. We can add a labels. We can add a labels. But as of now, do we have any labels added for this image? Maybe in the base image or maybe in our own Docker file, did you add any labels? Right? No. So if required, we can add a labels, kind of a metadata, key value pairs. Suppose, let's say this Docker file. I want to know this image has been created from which branch. Can I add kind of a label, like a label key as branch name and value as whatever branch from which branch I am creating that image? Or can I add, I want to know which team is managing or which team is managing that application. I want to know their DL, the team name maybe. So can I add a labels as label, the team name and their details, kind of a metadata. What is metadata, guys? What is metadata? Definition. Metadata. It's a data about data, information. It's a data about data. So I have an image. I want to know more, some information about that image, from which branch it is created or when it is created. Some kind of a labels we can add to the image. Something like this. So something like this. Label. Suppose I know this kind of things. Something like this, branch name. So if I create this image and if I push this image and wherever I see, will this label will be attached to that image? Now let me build the image. I'm building an image. Now I have an image. If I inspect that image, am I able to see that label, whatever I have added labels here, whatever label I have added, right? So it's a data about data. We can add a labels, key value pairs for the image, for that image. Now, will I able to parameterize this one? Because I don't know, let's say I'm building the image using pipeline. I don't know from which branch, which branch we are building that image. Will I able to parameterize that value? I don't want to hard code that label value as developed because I am not sure from which branch I am creating, right? So will I able to pass this at runtime? Maybe in my pipeline, let's say you are executing this docker build command in your pipeline. In your pipeline, do you able to get the branch name from which branch you are creating? Jenkins variables. So will I able to parameterize this one? I don't want to hard code this value. If required, will I able to parameterize this value? I want to pass this branch value at runtime. Is it possible? How to do that? How to do that? How to pass that value at runtime while building an image? Not environment variable. Environment variable is for different purpose. Environment variables can be accessed in the container also, or environment variables can be accessed in the image. That is environment variable, not using environment variable. Can I pass this as an argument? Arg, whatever we discussed yesterday, build arguments. Something like this. So here I can create one arg like branch name. The default value I will say something like this. Now here, will I able to refer that argument something like this? Then while building, can I pass something like this hyphen hyphen build hyphen arg that branch name equals to, suppose I am building from some future branch. Now what can be the label I can see now if I inspect that image? Will I able to see that branch name value as a develop, or will I able to see that as a future if I inspect that image? I am not referring properly. 1 second, guys. I think something is wrong. 1 second. So here, branch name. Now, yesterday also we saw it is not going to take hard coded value. I am passing at runtime hyphen hyphen build arg equal to future. 1 second, something is missing. Now let me inspect that image. Let me do this side. I don't want to use cache. Let's see how it works. How come it is taking that value? 1 second, guys. Label branch name. It should take runtime value. Somehow it is not taking. Let me define empty argument. Let me pass once. First of all, am I inspecting right image? Let's see. I'm inspecting different image. That's why. Okay. So even though this is the value, I'm inspecting wrong image. Okay. So that's why. Even though I hard code here, right? If I pass this way, now this is the image which we created. This one just few seconds ago. Then if I inspect this one, right, I can see that label, whatever we are passing. Can I see that label as a future? At runtime, we can pass the arguments to the build. So labels, these arguments we already discussed. Labels. What is labels? Can I add some kind of a metadata? If I inspect this image anywhere in any system, will I able to know some kind of a information about this image? If you see, we have some other images also, like CentOS image. So where these labels has been added, we have not added. Where these labels has been added, we have not added this one. I can see some labels when this image is built, what version, right? This has been added in the base image Docker file, kind of a metadata. Whatever key value pair you want to add, you can add that one using labels. Can I have multiple labels in my Docker file? Can I add multiple labels in my Docker file? Like this one, will I able to add one more label? Something like this. Can you have a multiple labels like this? We can create a multiple. We can add a multiple labels. Now, if I inspect this image, will I able to see that labels, whatever has been added? Docker inspect. Now, can I see those two labels? So we can add a labels using this label key value pair. Now we have a one more instruction called expose. What is this expose? You can see something like this in expose, like expose 8080 or expose something like this, port numbers. So what is this? It is not kind of a host port, or basically it is container port, on which port your container is running, which is not going to be like a firewall. You are not opening a firewall, or you are not assigning, or you are not changing the port of the container. It is just a documentation purpose. We can define on which port container is listening. It's like a documentation. It's kind of a documentation only. We are not setting or changing port of the container. We are not setting, we are not changing. It's just kindly, it's purely for a documentation purpose. Suppose I am creating an image. Do you know on which port I am creating, on which port my process is going to be run? I created one image, I push it to the repository. How do you know on which port I am creating that container? If I don't use this one, expose, if I use exposed, can I see that on which port that process might be running? If you see, when I inspect this Tomcat image, am I able to see this port, exposed port? It is not like you are changing. It is not like you are setting the port. It is not like you are opening some port. It is just purely for a documentation purpose. Now, if I inspect that image, whatever image I created, if you inspect my image, will you be able to understand on which port this container will listen if I have used that instruction expose? It's only for a documentation. It is not like you are publishing the port. It is not like you are opening the port, or it is not like you are setting the port. That is purely for a documentation purpose. Okay. Now, suppose in my Docker file, if I change this expose 8080 to 9090, does it mean this image will run on 9090? Does it mean this container will run on 9090 if I say something like this? No. As I already told, it is not like you are changing, you are assigning the port. It is only for a documentation purpose on which port you are running your container, your process, so that users of that image can understand, okay, you are running, your process is going to listen on this port. So basically that is your container port. It is only for a documentation purpose. Okay. Expose. Now, what is this user? The name itself is saying user. We can set, I mean to say, we can switch user for your image or container. We can set user or basically switch user for your image or container. Means as a which user you want to as a which user you want to run, or basically you want to start, you want to run or start your commands. You want to run your commands in the container or image. As a which user you want to start the container or process or the commands. Okay. So we can define as a which user. We can do that. Now Sunil is asking, sir, why can't I define that as a comment? Let's say in my Docker file, I can say port is 8080, something like this I can mention. But using this Docker file, you are creating an image. But whoever is using that image, do they have access to the Docker file? What Docker file has been used to create that image? From image, will they able to understand Docker file? Docker file is your source. Are you sharing your Docker file to the people who wants to use your image? Are you going to share your Docker file to the people who wants to use your image? No. So if I does anything, whatever I write in a Docker file, they don't know what it has been used. So even the comment, it is not going to work. But instead of this, if I say expose on some port, if they inspect that image, will they able to see this port as an exposed port if they inspect image? That is what the meaning of it. You can go with a label also. You can add a labels also, but labels are kind of a metadata. So this is that is purely for ports, which port it is going to listen. Now the way I have a expose, there is another instruction called user. As a which user you want to run your container, your process. By default, if I don't set any user, if I don't create user in a Docker file, if I don't create a user in a Docker file, if I don't switch or set the user, as a which user containers or your commands will be running, as a which user your container or commands will be running, your container process will be started as a which user. If I don't set any user, if I don't create any user, as a which user, as a root user. The default user is root. If you see, let me show that. If I have any container, let me start. Okay, let me create a container out of this image. So I'm trying to create a container out of this image. This image is not there locally. It has pulled the image and created a container. If you see, I'm going inside the container. As a which user, the container, the process is started, root user. Suppose you have a requirement, and also it is not recommended to run your container as a root user. You want to run it as a normal user. In that case, how can I change the user, as a which user that container has to be started? Using what instruction? I can set the user. It is this is like, it will just switch. Will this create a user? If I say something like this, it is going to just switch, but will this create a user? Will that create a user in the image? No. But before switching, can I create a user using this run instructions? Can I add a group like Tomcat? Can I add a user like Tomcat user add using run instruction? Can I do this like user add, username Tomcat? Once I create a user, once I create a group, can I switch the user? And after this instruction, whatever you have, whatever run, whatever cmd, whatever entry points you have after this instruction, as a which user these commands or entry points will be executed? If I do this way, as a Tomcat user. Just to give an example, let me show this Docker file. Let me show the Docker file of Jenkins. Let me show the Docker file of Jenkins. If you understand this Docker file, this is Jenkins Docker file. So what base image they are using? Jenkins requires Java. So what base image they are using? Java base image. On top of this Java base image, they are installing Git package, they are installing curl package. Then they defined few arguments. If you see here, are they creating a group called Jenkins? They defined as an argument. If you see, they are referring that argument here, group ID. Using run instruction, are they creating a group called Jenkins? Here, if you see, on top of this base image, are they creating a user called Jenkins, group called Jenkins using this instruction? So they're creating a user, they're creating a group called Jenkins. Then after some time, they downloaded the Jenkins that package, Jenkins jar file, I meant to say var file. Do you see, did they downloaded that Jenkins var file from this URL using run instruction? Do you see they are downloading that Jenkins var file and storing in this location within this image? They're downloading Jenkins var file using run on top of that. Now if you see here, are they changing the ownership to the directory? Are they changing the ownership to the directory wherever you have a Jenkins? They're changing the directory, ownership to the directory where they have downloaded Jenkins. And after all these instructions, they switched the user $user. Now this entry point which is going to start Jenkins as a which user? Jenkins is going to be started now. This entry point will be executed as a which user because of this line? This Jenkins will be executed as a which user? This Jenkins will be started as a Jenkins user. So, and also in real time, is it recommended to run our containers as a root user, or is it recommended to run containers as a normal user? The container process has to be started as which user? Which one is recommended? Root user, non-root user? It is recommended to run as a non-root user. If it is a non-root user, will I able to execute some commands like downloading some softwares in the container or accessing some files from the server? If it is a non-root user, will you able to execute lot of commands within the container? Will you able to install some softwares within the container to hack something? No. So that's why it is recommended to run containers as a normal user. Now, why there are two expose here for this for this image? Why there are two expose instructions? Jenkins will have how many ports? You already know Jenkins. Do we have a like slave agent port? Jenkins will listen on some agents. That agents can talk to the Jenkins on some agent port, and a web application, web interface. So Jenkins web interface port is what? Jenkins web interface port is what? 8080. This agent port, that slave port, that JNLP slave, Jenkins slaves, on which port that will listen? 50,000. Okay, that is what the meaning of it. Now, if I create a container out of this image, this Jenkins image, what will be up and running in that Jenkins, that container? Suppose if I create a container out of this image, They said this image has been deprecated. You can use this image. Now I can create a container out of this image. So if I create a container out of this image, what will be running in that container? Let's say I have already host port 8080 is used. Now I will use different port. Now if I create a container, using this image, if I create a container, what will be running inside that container? Now this image is not there locally. The image is getting pulled and it is creating a container. What will be running inside that container? Now this container, what is running inside that container? What process is running inside that container? If you see, what process is running? If you see here, Java -jar, Java-jar. What is this? Jenkins. So does my Jenkins is up and running as a container? Does Jenkins is up and running as a container? Now if I access this machine, right? So we can see that. Now if I go inside the container, here it is showing system user. But if I go inside the container, you can see that is running as a normal user. I mean to say, if you go exec -it, it is not going to run as a Ubuntu user actually. Let me go inside this container. If I have a bash, bin/bash. So what is this? This PS itself is not there. This PS itself is not there. So as a which user, your container process is started? Jenkins user. If you see, am I able to execute like these kind of commands? PS itself is not there. Now, since it's a normal user, will I able to install packages? Like suppose I want to install some package like this. M itself is not there. Even though we have a M or apt, if you see, since it's a normal user, will I able to execute? Will I able to install some softwares within the container if it is a normal user? So can we reduce the attack surface by running a containers as a normal user, as a non-root user? Can we reduce the attack surface? Can we secure using containers running as a normal user? So that is one of the best practice. We need to follow. Now, if you see sudo also, I am using sudo. Do you see, is it working? You cannot use sudo. You cannot run as a sudo user because it's a virtual, it is not a machine. This is not a machine, it's a container. It will not have all the packages, all the modules, right? You can't run sudo. So we can reduce the attack surface by running the containers as a non-root user, normal user. Now, Jenkins is running as a container. Now, if I access this server on this host port, will I able to access my Jenkins web interface using this server public IP? This host IP and this host port, if I access, will I able to see that Jenkins web interface if the port is opened, that host port 9090? If required, can we run any software as a container like Nexus, SonarQube, or Jenkins? Can we run that softwares also as a containers if required? The way we are running in a virtual machines directly, can we run that as a containers also if we have a images? We can run as a containers also. But in real time, do we really run Jenkins as a container? Very rare, very rare. You will not run Jenkins as a container. Jenkins will be like whatever way you have installed. In a virtual machines, you will run Jenkins. But using Jenkins, will I able to build and deploy the applications, our applications as a containers? We can run our applications as a containers. Now, if you see, I can access Jenkins, which is running as a container, which is running as a container. Now, this Jenkins is running as a container. Where can I get this initial admin password? Will I able to see in my server? If I do this, am I getting that initial password? In the server, do I have this file? No. But where can I see this file? How can I get the initial admin password now? This is running as a container. So can I do this? Docker exec Jenkins cat, this one. I am executing cat command on this container. Now this is my initial admin password. Right? Now Jenkins is running as a container, or Jenkins is running in a virtual machine now? I mean to say in a virtualized deployment it is running, or it is running as a container. Now whatever Jenkins I am accessing as a container, like this. If I want to run Nexus also, can I, if I have the image, can I run Nexus also as a container if required? If you have a Nexus, Sonatype Nexus, right? Sonatype Nexus. Now, since it is going to be run as a container, do I really need 2 GB RAM? It is container, it is not a system, right? Do I really need 2 GB for this? Not required, right? Because it's just a container. It's not a full-blown operating system, right? So you can see what is the Nexus, how much memory you required, all these things, right? You can create a container using this image also. So who created this image? Is it created by any developers like us, or it is created by community official image? You see who created this? You can see Sonatype. The Sonatype is basically in a community who is managing the Nexus. Like this, you can create a containers, whatever containers, like SonarQube, whatever it is. But in most of the cases, do we run our CI/CD tools as a containers like Nexus, SonarQube, Jenkins? Do we run? In most of the cases, we will not run as a containers. It will be like a virtual machines only. But required, can we run Jenkins, SonarQube, Nexus also as a containers? We can do that. Okay. But whether it is a container, whether it's a virtual machine in which we are running Jenkins, is there any changes in the Jenkins concepts or SonarQube concepts or Nexus concepts? Does concepts will change? Whether you are running as a container, whether it is running as a machine, there is no difference. Same like, we run Tomcat also in a virtual machine. We run a Tomcat directly in a virtual machine, virtual deployment. Now, same application, the Tomcat, are we running as a container? We are running as a container, but does Tomcat will change whether it's a container, whether it's a server? Does the concept of Tomcat varies? No, it remains same. So this is how we can use the Docker instructions to set the user for your container. Now we have one more thing called a value. Volumes are very, very important. What is volume? Volumes are basically your mount points, storage. As I already told, each and every container will have its own storage, its own file system. If the container is deleted and recreated, do we have the data? Do we have that storage, whatever data we have? So containers are created and deleted. Whatever data which is getting generated as part of the container file system, will it exist once the container is deleted and recreated? No. So if I want to retain, if I want to maintain the data, do I need to mount with some external storages? The container file system, container directories, do I need to mount with some external storages? Even though container is deleted, I want to have the data. So that is what the concept of volumes, right? So these volumes we will discuss in detail in a separate session. Very, very important. We will discuss this volumes concept in a separate session. So these are the instructions, very important instructions in Docker file. Are we going to write all these instructions? Are we going to use each and every instruction in all the Docker files, whatever we are going to write? Or based on your use case, based on your requirement, you are going to use these instructions? Depends on the use case, depends on the requirement, right? We will use these instructions. Now, before I go for a Dockerizing some applications, I want to give one assignment. I want to give one assignment. Assignment is create a custom Jenkins image. I want you to create a custom Jenkins image. What is the meaning of custom Jenkins image? I don't want you to take this image. I don't want you to take this image. I want you to create your own Jenkins image using Docker file. So you take any base, you take CentOS as a base, or you take Ubuntu as a base. On top of that, using all these instructions, whatever we discussed, CMD or entry point, on top of this Ubuntu base or on top of this CentOS base, I want you to create a Jenkins image using run instructions. Will you able to install Java? Will you able to download Jenkins war file using run, using add? Also, you can download Jenkins war file. So I want you to write a Docker file. Using the Docker file, I want you to create your own Jenkins image. If I just create a container out of that image, whatever image you created, what should be up and running, guys? I just execute Docker run on your image, whatever image you created, that Jenkins image. If I execute this way, the Jenkins should be up and running. So this is the assignment. You know all the instructions, what is what, you know what is from, what is add, what is run, what is CMD, or what is entry point. You know all these instructions. Do you guys give an attempt to write this Docker file? In real time also same thing. You will get one requirement. You will get one requirement. For that requirement, you need to write the code. You need to write the code. In the interviews also, they will give this assignment. Again, I am repeating, it's a container, not a machine. If you write like this, will it work? Yum install Jenkins. If you like this, will it work? Or if I able to start this like service Jenkins start, do I need to do this way inside the container? Don't do this way, because it's a container. Within the container, these packages will be available. Systemctl packages will be available, or service packages will be available. Container should be as light as possible. The container should not be heavyweight. Container should have only minimal softwares, whatever is required to run your application. So maybe you can do something like this. You can install Java this way, but will you download that jar file, var file, Jenkins var file, using run instruction or using using add instruction? Will you able to download that Jenkins as a var software? So whatever, this one, can I give some instruction in my Docker file like this? Maybe add to some folder, or I can do like this also, run with wget, run with curl, download to some directory. Using CMD, will you able to start this var file? Can I do this like this, java -jar that Jenkins var file? If I do this way, will it be started? Whenever you create a container, does Jenkins will be started automatically? Once you download this jar file, if you have a Java installed, if you have a Jenkins jar file, if I do this way, will the Jenkins will be started whenever I create a container? I want you to do this assignment. Okay. Now, is everyone clear what is the assignment? Is everyone clear what is the assignment? So that you can understand whatever we have discussed, right? Now, push your image, push that image to your registry. Suppose this is my registry, push that image to your registry and give this image to me. Just ping me this image name. Push to your registry. Push to your registry. Give this image name. If I create a container out of this image, Jenkins should be up and running. That is what the assignment. Is everyone clear, guys? What is the assignment on the Docker file? Whatever we discussed so far. Okay, try to do that as an assignment and share your image with me. Don't share Docker files personal, share the Docker files individually to me, personally to me. Don't share the Docker files in the group, because I want everyone to try that one. If you share the Docker file, you know others also will copy paste and they will say, yes, I am done with assignment. So don't share Docker file in the Skype group, even though you do it. share it to me personally. I want everyone to do this assignment because this is very, very important. In the interview also they will ask, can you write some sample Docker file? In the interview also they will ask all these instructions. Once you get into a job also, if they are using containers, they may ask you to create some base image. So that's why take this assignment as seriously and do the assignment. Okay. Now let me show some other sample Docker files for your understanding. Now if you see, I am not Dockerizing any application here. Let me show this Docker file. Using this Docker file, what we are trying to do? What can you understand using this Docker file? So I am taking Tomcat as a base image. What I am trying to do using this one, when this command will be executed? When this command will be executed? This run command, when this will be executed? During image creation. What I am trying to do, this you already know, this is just SCD. What I am trying to do using SCD? What I am trying to do SCD? So using SCD, I am trying to add this entry. I am trying to add this entry in this file. I am adding this line. I am adding a Tomcat users entry in this file. So if I do this while creating a image itself, wherever I create a container, does that container will have this Tomcat user? That Tomcat will be having this user. If you want to really access manager application, if you want to really access that Tomcat manager app, can I access that manager app using this username and password? While creating image itself, I am doing this. But if I do this, once the container is created, will that exist? Will that configuration exist if the container is deleted and recreated? If I do this change by going inside the container and if I modify this file, if the container is deleted and recreated, does that configuration exist in a new container? If I directly do inside the container? No. But in real time, do we really use manager applications, guys? Tomcat manager apps, do you really deploy the WAR files using manager apps in real time? No. Everything is automation, right? But if you have a use case, you can do that. Now, let me take one more Docker file. Let me take one more Docker file. If you see, by looking at this Docker file, can you tell me what we are trying to do using this Docker file? By looking at this Docker file, you know what is this. So this maintainer, I forgot to explain this maintainer. This maintainer is like an author who is maintaining, or who is the author of the Docker, that image, who is maintaining the image, or who is writing that, who is maintaining that image. So maintainer, I have given some mail ID. That's it. Okay. So using this Docker file, what we are trying to do by looking at this, can you guys tell me what I am trying to do? We used all these instructions: run, work dir, add, expose, cmd, all these things has been used. Am I creating my own Tomcat image? Am I creating a custom Tomcat image using this Docker file? On top of CentOS libraries, we are installing Java, we are downloading Tomcat tar file, we are extracting the Tomcat tar file, and I'm setting this as a working directory. Now, if I create a image out of this Docker file, and if I create a container out of that image, will I have a Tomcat up and running? Yes. Can I use this as a base image? Can I use whatever image I am going to be created out of this one? Can I use this as a base image for my applications if required? We can do that. Now, we need to follow some best practices. We need to follow some best practices while creating a Docker images. While creating a Docker images, we need to follow some best practices. Followed while creating images. What are those best practices? One is use Alpine images wherever it is possible. Use Alpine images as base images wherever it's possible. What is Alpine image? What is Alpine first? Anyone has any idea what is Alpine or what is Alpine images? So Alpine is a lightweight, very lightweight container library, very lightweight Linux. So if you see in the Docker Hub, there are Alpine images. In the Docker Hub, there are Alpine images. You see there are Alpine images like Alpine Git, Alpine Helm, Alpine this or Alpine. So Alpine is basically one container library. So what is the package manager they have? They have apt or they have yum or there is another package manager called apk. There is another package manager called apk. So there is a Alpine images, a minimal Docker image based on the Alpine Linux. So within how much size I will get Alpine Linux, that Alpine library, that Linux library to interact with kernel. If you see what is the size of that Alpine Linux base image, just 5 MB in size. So wherever it is possible, use Alpine images. Next one, don't install or copy unnecessary packages. I mean to say softwares. Don't install unnecessary softwares packages. Don't install or copy unnecessary softwares packages or files to the image. So image should be as lightweight as possible. Image should be as lightweight as possible. Image should have only minimal softwares or packages. Which is required to run your software, which is required to run application. Why we should not have unnecessary softwares, unnecessary files in the image? What will be the problem if I have more files, more softwares in the image? Does the container will take? Lot of CPU, lot of memory. Will it become heavyweight? Will it become heavyweight? Then while pushing the image, while pulling the image also, will it take more time? The image creation time, pushing and pulling the images also, does it take more time if it is huge in size? The image size is very huge. Yes. Do I really need all those softwares, unnecessary softwares to run my application? Suppose I want to run one jar file. Do I need lot of softwares except Java? Do I need any software except Java in that? Do I need like curl, get, wget, git software, like those kind of softwares? Do I need really in that image? No. So don't install unnecessary softwares or packages. Images should be as lightweight as possible. Next one, use only official images. Use only official images as a base images. Official base images. Use only official base images. What is the meaning of official base images? If required, can I create my own image and push it, maintain that image in the Docker Hub for public? Can I create an image and can I maintain the Docker image in Docker Hub for public people, for community? We can do that. But is it recommended to use third-party images? Except official images, is it recommended to use third-party images? Why? Why we should not use unofficial images? Because can I write some code in my Docker image? I will have some malicious code. I can have some malicious code in my Docker image. If you are using that image, I can get your data. Will I able to write some kind of a malicious code, kind of a virus software which can send your data to me? If you are using my software, unofficial software, we can have some malicious code, right? So use only official base images as a base. Next and important thing, reduce the number of layers. Number of layers wherever it's possible or wherever it's applicable. Reduce the number of layers for that image. So how can I reduce the layers? How can I reduce the layers? If you see this Docker file, if you see, I am not following best practices. I am not following best practices. Can you tell me why? If you see, will I able to merge these two at least together? Some related instructions, some related commands. Can I merge these two? Whatever I have highlighted, extracting and renaming, can I do it in a single run instruction? Which doesn't mean have everything one run. It is not like have all this with a single run. It doesn't mean that. Related, installing Java as a separate layer. But here, can I merge these two together where I am extracting the tar file and renaming that folder name into a single layer by merging these two run instructions into a single run? Something like this. If you see one more sample Docker file, I'm doing something like this. This is another Docker file. Here, if you see, am I following some kind of a best practices here by merging multiple run instructions into a single run? Now, will it reduce one layer of the image? Will it reduce the layer, one layer? So instead of having this one as one run instruction and this one as another run instruction, we are combining. It is reducing the number of layers as much as possible. Here also, if you see this one and this one together, we can reduce the number of layers. So it will improve the performance. it will improve the performance of your image. I mean to say build creation, pushing the image or pulling the image, performance will be improved if you have less number of layers. So reduce the number of layers as much as possible by combining related run instructions. Okay, we can do this. This is one thing. And if you see, still I have some best practices to follow here. Can you identify and tell me what I am missing? Still I have some best practices. Still I need to do some improvement. There is a area of improvement here. Can you tell me what is that? We already reduced the run commands. We already reduced. As I already told, which doesn't mean only have one run, right? Related. This is one related command I am merging. We already reduced the number of layers. Then what is missing? If you observe closely, deleting the tar file, right? If you see, I downloaded the Tomcat tar. I have extracted the Tomcat tar. Do I really need the tar file anymore in the image? Do I really need the tar file anymore in the image? Since we extracted already. Is it suggestible to remove the tar file, which will reduce the size, image size? So can I have some instructions to delete the tar file, like rm-r, that f, the Tomcat tar file? That is one thing. And also, if you see the CMD, in which form I am giving CMD, what is the recommended form to have a CMD? Executable form. So you have some best practices to follow. And one more important, wherever it's possible, one more important thing is run container as a non-root user, normal user. So these are the best practices which you need to follow while creating an image, right? So the standards, you can follow this one. Now, let's try to Dockerize some applications. Using Docker, can I Dockerize any application, any programmatic code? Let's say people are developing applications in Node.js. Let's say people are developing applications in Python. Let's say people are developing applications in Java, normal standalone jar files. Will I able to Dockerize any application, Python application or Node.js application or Java application? Let's see that. Okay. Give me 1 minute, guys. I'll be back. We'll continue. Give me 1 minute. Okay, let's continue. Let's take some Node.js application. We have this Java based application which we have already Dockerized, right? This one. So it is generating a jar, var file. So if you see this Docker file, using this Docker file, are we creating a image for that application, Java based web application, which we have already done. We are taking this as a base image. On top of that base image, we are copying our application code. So if I create an image out of this Docker file, does that image will have a required softwares to run this application? Softwares plus configurations plus application code. This we have already Dockerized. Now, let's take one Node.js application. Did you guys deploy Node.js application when Bhaskar sir was explaining maybe Jenkins or maybe some other topics? He might have explained one Node.js application. Did you guys deploy that Node.js application already? Yes. But how did you deploy it? Is it a virtualized deployment or is it a containerized deployment? How you guys deployed that application? Did you deploy that application as a container or it's virtualized, virtual machine? Within your virtual machine, you guys deployed. Now, let me take that same application. Let me take that same application. I think this is the application, right? You guys deployed Node.js application. Now, I want to deploy this Node.js application. There is a Node.js code. There is a Node.js code. It's a scripting language. Do we need to compile scripting language like Node.js code? The way we are compiling Java code, do we need to compile Java code? I mean to say Node.js code. It's a scripting language. It's a scripting language. You no need to compile Node.js code. It's a scripting. It's an interpretation language. Right? You no need to compile. So this is my Node.js code. This is my Node.js code. Now, on which I think the developer has set this port 9981. So if there is a port environment variable, the Node.js process will run on this port. If we are not setting this port environment variable, we are not setting port as an environment variable, on which port they are trying to run this Node.js process? If they don't set, on which port they are trying to run this Node.js application? 9981. There is a Node.js code. For Node.js code, the way you have a Maven pom.xml, the way we have a pom.xml, the way we have a pom.xml for Maven Java based application, for Node.js also there will be some dependencies. So where we are defining the dependencies, like Maven, you have a pom.xml where you are defining the dependencies for that application. This Node.js also will have some node dependencies. So what is that file? Package.json. So what are these? What are this? This. What are these? These are the dependencies of that Node.js application. So these dependencies has been defined. There is a Node.js script. There is a Node.js script. They are using Express framework to create a this APIs. That is dependency. Now there is a Node.js code. So there is a dependencies. So how you guys has built this one? Did you guys executed something like this? npm install. Yes, Nitin. Nitin is asking where do we set the port, right? So port we will set using code only. In the Node.js code only, you can set the port, on which port you can run that process, right? So you have, what is this package.json? I'm explaining Node.js. What is this package.json? This package.json will have a dependencies. And your Node.js script, what will be the extension? What will be the extension of your Node.js files? Suppose if it is a Java, what is the extension of your Java files? Java code. If you are using Java, what is the extension of Java files? .java. But if it is a Node.js script, what will be the script extensions, that Node.js code extensions? This JS. You can have not only one JS, you can have lot of JS files. So from this JS file, you can refer or you can call this JS file. That is Node.js code. Okay. So if you want to run this one, did you guys executed this? Normally, when you do this npm install, then did you guys executed npm start, something like this, when you are doing the deployments? So what is this npm? What is this npm, guys? Node package manager. Node package manager. Node package managers, right? So now I want to Dockerize this Node.js application. So if I want to Dockerize this Node.js application, if I want to create an image for this Node.js application, do we need to have a Docker file? Do we need to create a Docker file? So do you see, we already created a Docker file. We already created a Docker file. So since it's a Node.js image, what is the base I am using as per the requirement? What base I am using? Since it's a Node.js project, what base image I am using? Node. So we are using this as a base image. So on top of this base image, what is this? What it does? We already discussed workdir. What it does? Workdir. It is going to create and set the working directory. Then copy. What we are trying to copy? I am just given two dots. I am just given two dots. What is this first dot? What is this second dot? I just given two dots. Copy. Dot dot. It is going to copy whatever files we have in the build context. Copy whatever files we have in the build context to the image. So what is the working directory of image? So this second dot, where it is going to copy? This is the working directory. So if I am building this image from this context, is it going to copy all these folders, this image folder, scripts folder, views folder, this app.js, package.json, all those things from the build context? Not everything from the server, from the build context, whatever you have in the build context. So is it going to copy all these files? Suppose this is my build context. From this directory I am building the image. Is it going to copy all these folders, all these files to the image? This dot dot. Is it going to copy all those files directories? Because it's a Node.js script. There is no package. You are not creating any package for Node.js, right? You are copying that Node.js code as is. It is going to copy everything. Sometimes in the interview, they are going to ask one question. I want to ignore some files when I am copying. Even though I give dot dot, I want to ignore some files or directories from the build context. I don't want to copy specific files. Suppose like this. Docker file is part also. Docker file is also part of the build context. Is it going to copy the Docker file also to the image? Now if I have this dot dot, Is it going to copy the Docker file also to the image? Because that is part of the build context. So I don't want to copy few files or folders like Docker file, README file, or I want to ignore few files. So like the way we have done in a Git. In Git, if you don't want to commit few files or folders, where do you mention that files or folders if you don't want to commit those files? In Git, .git ignore, .git ignore. Similarly, is it possible for me to ignore some files when I am copying to the images? Where can I mention? There is a file which you need to create. That file name we call it as what? If you see here, what is that file name we call it? Sometimes in the interview they will ask this question, what is a Docker ignore file? So this Docker ignore. So in this Docker ignore, I have mentioned some files like this. So will these files will be copied to the image or will it be ignored? When we are copying the files to the image, will these two files will be copied or it will be ignored? Whatever I have listed here, it will be ignored. Now we are copying the Node.js code. Then what is this npm install? When this npm install will be executed? Since I am mentioning as a run, when this npm install will be executed? When this npm install will be executed? While creating a image itself. While creating a image itself. What this npm install does? Is it going to download the required dependencies, whatever has been mentioned in the package.json? That Node.js dependencies. Is it going to download those Node.js dependencies to the image? While creating a image itself, is it going to have those dependency downloaded in the image? Yes. Then what is this expose? Because whoever wants to use this image, if I don't mention this line, will they able to understand on which port that process is going to be running? No. So if required, they are referring as an environment variable. Can I set one environment variable, that port environment variable? Suppose I don't want to run this on 9981. In the code, they are referring from one environment variable. If you see, they are referring env.port. So if this is not set, then on this one it will run. If required, in my Docker file, can I set this environment variable in my Docker file like this? Just env, guys. Just env that port like this. I can set env port, just port, that is a variable name. If I say something like this, now on which port the process will run now? Since we are setting on which port the process will run, if required, can I set the environment variable like this? In the code, if someone is referring that variable, this will be reflected in that code now? If I do this, it will be reflected, right? If you want to do that, you can do that. Otherwise, leave that as is, right? This is the port, the default port. Now, then when this command will be executed, what is this node app.js? What is this? It is like java-jar command. So how to run, how to start Node.js application? Can I mention node, that script name, that main script name? That application has to be started. So using this Docker file, if I create an image, if I create a container out of that image, does that Node.js application will be up and running? as a container. Let me show that. Let me take this code. Let me take this code. Let's say this is my build server. Let me clone that code. Now, this is my Node.js project. Now here, I have a Docker file. I have a Docker file. Using this Docker file, I am creating an image. Something like this. Now, using this Docker file, I am creating an image. Now, does this image contains Node.js software plus its dependencies plus my application code? Once the image has been created, does that image contains Node.js software, my application, and its dependencies? It is taking some time. Let's wait. Maybe let me clean up my system. I may have a lot of images. Let me remove all those things. It's just 1 GB server. It's just 1 GB server, right? Let me clean up. Now let me create an image. Now we have a Docker file. Using the Docker file, we are creating an image. So it is pulling Node.js base image. On top of that Node.js base image, then it is going to create. If you want to clean up your system, you can have a cron job, or you can execute some pipeline which will delete unused, I mean to say dangling images, stopped containers. You can run some kind of a cron job in that server, or you can have some pipeline which can clean up that server. Because if you have some unnecessary unused images, is it going to take some storage from that server from the Docker machine, which we already discussed? You can clean up that one. Okay. Now image is created successfully, this image. Now does this image has that application code, dependencies, and everything? Now let me push this image. Let me push this image. Now wherever I want to deploy, let's say this is my deployment server. This is my deployment server. If I create a container out of that image, that Node.js image, does my application will be up and running in this server? If I create a container out of that image, whatever image I have created now. Now if I deploy, or if I create a container out of that image, now if you see, let's see if I have any containers. Okay, let me create a container out of that image. I am using this port, container port. From that image, whatever image has been pushed to the registry. Now this image has been pushed to the registry. Now using that image, I am creating a container here. So now this image is not there locally. It is pulling from the registry, and it is creating a container. Now is my application is up and running? Once the container is created, does this application will be up and running, that Node.js application? Now the container is created. So within this container, does my application is running? Let me access. Let me access. On which host port I publish this application, this container? On which host port I published on this one, 9981. So let me open the firewall in AWS. Let me open the firewall in AWS in that server. So I opened this firewall in AWS. Now using that server IP, public IP, host IP, this machine host IP, on that host port 9981. So I'm getting cannot get a slash, which means nothing is running on the root context. Nothing is running on the root context, I think, in that application. It is nothing is running on the root context. We have this context, Mithun Technologies has a path, or HTML/HTML also has a path, or there is something called JSON data. So let me access one of the context, one of the path. Now, am I getting the response from that application which is running as a container Node.js application /HTML? We have, I think there is some API, I think JSON data. Now, wherever I create a container out of that image, does that application will be up and running? So that is running. Like this, if required, will I able to Dockerize Python application also? Suppose I have some Python application. Let's say, where is Python application. So let's say this Python application. What is the extension of Python code, guys? Python applications, if the applications are developed using Python, the extension will be .py. So this is Python code. They are using some dependencies, some APIs called Flask APIs to write the Python code, right? So this is one application, one context. So this is one API. So there is a Python code. Now there is a Python code, Python application here. Now in Python code, in which file we can define the dependencies, like Python dependencies, the way we have a Maven dependencies for Java, the way you have a Node dependencies for Node. Python also will have some dependencies. The dependencies where we can define, there is a file called requirements file. There is a file called requirements file. So what are these two? In the requirements.txt file, we have developer has defined something. What are these two? These are dependencies. These are the dependencies for this Python code. This Python code, if you see, are they using those Flask APIs, Flask dependencies? They have defined those dependencies in the requirement.txt. It is like a Maven file for Python. It's like a Maven pom.xml for Python. Now there is a Python script, right? There is a Python script, Python code. Now to Dockerize this Python code, do we need to have a Docker file like this? If you see. So what base I am using? What base image I am using? Python base image. What this does? Workdir what it does, it is creating one directory and switching that directory. Again, Python copy dot dot. So Python also you no need to compile, right? So is it going to copy whatever files that Python script, like this Python script, this Python script, these files, whatever files I have in the current directory, is it going to copy to the image working directory? If I say copy dot dot, it is copying. So what is this pip install? What is this pip install, guys? You saw Maven install, you saw npm install. Like what is this pip install? What is this pip? What is this pip software? It's a Python package. Pip is basically Python package manager. So if I execute pip install on that requirements file, is it going to download those Python dependencies, whatever I have defined in that requirements.txt file? Is it going to download those Python dependencies to the image? Application code plus its dependencies. Application code plus its dependencies. So what is the default port Python will run? That Flask will run basically, that I have defined in this file, right? That I have defined in this file, right? This is the main application, Python application. So the Flask will run on default port 5000. On which port now this Python application will be running? 5000. Now how to run Python code? Like Python, your script name you can give. So this is what it is going to be executed. Now, if I create an image out of this Docker file, this code, let me clone that code. Let me clone that code. This Python project. Now let me go inside that Python code. We have a Python scripts. We have a Python scripts. We have a Docker file. Now, using this, I am creating an image, something like this. Now, does this image contains that Python software plus its dependencies and application code, whatever is required to run that Python application? Now, wherever I create a container out of that image, does my Python application will be up and running? Now, image has been created successfully. Now, let me push the image to the repository. So why requested access to the resource is denied? Let me log in. Maybe wrong registry. Okay. So I have wronged tag wrongly. There is a typo here. Let me tag again. I will tag correctly. There is a typo here. Docker hands-on slash. The registry name is not correct. So let me push. With correct registry details. Now here in this deployment server, once image is pushed to the registry, if I create a container out of that Python that Python, let's say this is the port. Out of this image, if I create a container, does my application, that Python application will be up and running as a container? Now image is still being pushed. Once it is pushed, I can create a container here. Now, if you see, I'm running multiple applications as a containers in this machine. Does each container is isolated from other, which means does each application is isolated from other? If there is any issue in this Python application, will it impact other applications? No. If there is any change in this application, if there is any change in this Python code, Python application, do I need to rebuild, recreate other containers, whatever other applications we are running? No. Containers are isolated from each other. Right? So this way, we can use Docker to build and deploy applications as containers. Now, if you see, I'm creating the container out of this image. Python application will be up and running. So let me open this port. Meantime, let me open this port, that 5000 port in this security group. That 5000 port. Now, if you see on this host port 5000, now do you see, am I getting the response from that Python code, the root context? On the root context, right? On the root in this Python, we are getting this response. Application is working. There is an API, REST API. So let me show you. /API/tasks. There is some API, REST API. Do you see? Am I getting that response? That API response as a JSON format. Then we can create a container here. So here, same image. Can I deploy the same image in any other environments? Like, let's say this is your dev server. Let's say this is your dev environment. Can I deploy that image in a QA environment, same image? Do I need to recreate another image? Do I need to create another image? Do you really create, for each and every environment, do you have a Docker images, separate images, or same images we can use for other environments? Same image. Only what is required software, which is required in other environments like QA, prod. What is the only software which is required in those environments? Only Docker. Wherever you have a Docker, you can create a containers, right? So same image can be used to deploy in the other environments. If I just have a Docker, wherever I have a Docker, will I able to run this application? Whether it's a QA server, whether it's a prod server, if I have a Docker installed in that servers, will I able to run this application? We can do that. That is how it works. Okay. So Docker file is very, very important, guys. That's why we spend a lot of time. So tomorrow I'll continue with the other topic called Docker volumes. No, first I will start with the Docker networks. Then we will go for a volumes. But before that, still there is a small concept which is left, is multi-stage Docker file. Tomorrow, first I will explain what is multi-stage Docker file for some time. Later I will go for a Docker networks. So this is what we will continue tomorrow. Chandan is asking, sir, why I need to get the base image of another OS like CentOS or like Ubuntu? As I told, containers are isolated from your host. Containers are isolated from your host. Does container will have a complete operating system? In the beginning itself, I told. Does containers will have a complete operating system? No. Containers will not have an operating system. It is going to use host machine. But do we need some libraries to interact with your host machine kernels? Some container libraries. That Linux is nothing but a kernel, that libraries. Do you need some container libraries? Do you need some kind of a libraries to interact with your host machine kernel? So that is what the base image contains, container libraries. If I say I am doing from CentOS, is it full-blown operating system or Linux libraries to interact with kernel? Without having these libraries, will I able to run these instructions? Does these commands work? Any run instruction or any CMD instruction. Without these container libraries, will I able to execute these commands? Any commands? No. So that's why we are having a container libraries, base libraries. Even though we are saying OpenJDK, does that OpenJDK contain some container library in the background? Again, this OpenJDK might be using another base image. That might be CentOS library, that might be Alpine library, that might be Ubuntu library, right? Internally, it will have that libraries. That is why we need those libraries. So we'll continue tomorrow, guys. If you understand the concept correctly, Venkat, we are publishing the port, we are attaching the port for a container. I mean to say, you are publishing, you are exposing the host port for a container. Will I able to do in the image? Will I able to do in the image itself? Image is different, container is different. Image is just a package. When you are creating a container, then you are publishing. You can't do in the Docker file. You can't do in the Docker file. That has to be done while creating a container only, not in the Docker file. Docker file is just input for your image. So what is Docker attach? Docker attach, the name itself is saying it is going to attach the container shell to the server shell. It is going to attach container shell to the server shell, which means it is going to attach that process to the current shell. Once you execute Docker attach, and if you close the terminal, is it going to kill the container? Since you attach that container shell to the current shell, the server shell, if you close the terminal, will the container will be stopped after you attaching? If you close the terminal, it will stop. Attach is you are attaching the container shell to the server shell, current shell. Thank you, guys. That's it for today. I'll continue tomorrow, but I want everyone to do the assignments. I want everyone to do the assignments, whatever has been given so far. Without assignments, you cannot understand anything. It is whatever time I am spending here, I am trying to cover Docker in and out. I can, why we are covering in and out of Docker this much extensively we are spending here, because Docker is very, very important. Our students are able to crack the jobs. Our students are able to clear the interviews themselves. Our students are able to manage their work themselves without any proxy, without any support, because we are covering that much extensively. If you don't practice, you cannot clear the interviews, you cannot crack the job, Even though you crack the job, you cannot manage your work on your own. But if you practice, if you spend a lot of time doing the assignments and practice, you don't need any proxy, you don't need any support, work support also. So try to do the assignments. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.